Welcome back, everyone, to NeuroAlchemy, a NeuroSynergy podcast where we explore healing as a nonlinear, multidimensional unfolding, held gently, slowly, and with deep respect for sensitive and overwhelmed listeners. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Young. Before we begin, a soft reminder today's conversation is educational. We'll be talking about trauma, healing, and emotional safety. Please move at your own pace. Pause when you need to. You are always in choice. Here on NeuroAlchemy, we define every term as if you're hearing it for the very first time because clarity creates safety, and safety opens the doorway to more healing opportunities. This is not a space for pushing or fixing. It's a space for understanding, integration, and becoming. Please take a breath. There's nothing you need to do right now. Today, I'm so delighted to introduce you to our guest, Brenda Bailey, and I want to offer her a very warm welcome to NeuroAlchemy. Brenda is an integrative healing practitioner with more than 34 years on her own trauma recovery journey. For over 2 decades, she has worked as a Theta Healing practitioner and holds 13 certifications across alternative and integrative healing modalities. What stands out to me about Brenda's work is her clear and compassionate message. Healing is possible without reopening old wounds, and meaningful change does not have to take decades. Her approach centers on safety, gentleness, and respect for the nervous system, which makes this conversation especially important. Brenda, I'm really glad you're here. Welcome.
I'm excited. Thank you for allowing me to be here, Sarah. Dr. Sarah.
Before we move further into the conversation, I like to begin with a simple arrival check-in. Brenda, how are you arriving today, physically, emotionally, mentally, or energetically as you come into this conversation?
In a really good space today. It's been an exhausting week and I finally caught up with my rest. So I feel rested. I feel awake. I feel aware. I just had a session with a client that went really well. And so that, always makes my day. So, and it's at the beginning of the day and we're getting ready to have company coming from out of town. It just kind of happened in that same, so for to be in a good place as we're arriving for people, I'm like, vacuum in the other part of the house. I'm on a podcast. So things are working out really well. I'm in a good place. Yay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. There's no right way to arrive here. However, you're showing up today to all our listeners out there is enough. And before we move into your story, I'd love to help orient our listeners. Brenda, you use language in your work that may be new for some people. So let's define a few key terms gently and clearly. First, can you tell us about theta healing? What it is in simple terms, and how do you understand it supporting healing?
So just a little background on me. Um, I disassociated most of my childhood because it was pretty traumatic. And I think that that lent for me to be able to have a more balanced nervous system as an adult, but still had that trauma and everything that I didn't really realize about it. So I couldn't really be helped with traditional psychotherapy because when that happens, they always want to know why. Why do you feel like that you're acting like this? Why do you feel like that this is happening? And I didn't know why. So that's why I looked for other alternatives. And I did, that's why I have 13 different certifications. And Theta Healing was my eighth certification. And I always kiddingly say that when I discovered Theta Healing, the angels part, the heavens parted and the angels sang. Because I finally found something that I didn't have to know why I was doing things. I just needed to know what I wanted to have changed. So Theta Healing is named that because as a practitioner, I go into a theta brain wave. And that's where great change goes. And of course, if you know anything about the brain and the different brain waves, like we're talking in a beta brain wave right now, that's what your brain does. Then there's the alpha brain wave that some people are familiar with because it has to do with Reiki. Reiki is very common to know to go into an alpha brainwave. So Reiki's been around a long time. People know that. Theta brainwave is where you go. It's the reason that monks go to monasteries. They want to learn how to maintain a theta brainwave. And every time we talk about like beta, gamma, theta, what that means is that our brain is slowing down in a more meditative state. And it's truly where people feel like the energy of all that is. So, as a theta healing practitioner, we use kinesiology to discover what needs to change for people because the body doesn't lie. People can tell me when we talk about beliefs, they can tell me what they believe, but that's not the same as your beliefs because believing has to do with your brain. And beliefs have to, from a theta healing perspective, are held, your trauma, your resentments, your beliefs are all held on a cellular level. So what theta healing does is as a practitioner, I go into a theta brainwave and we discover through kinesiology what needs to change. And then I get to witness it happen by bypassing the conscious and subconscious mind. Because the brain, a lot of times, is the cog in the system, slows things down because we have to think, think, think. And then it makes those changes on a cellular level. So a lot of times when people tell us like, just change how you think, it'll change things. It's really not how it works. When you make changes on a cellular level, your heart and mind will follow. And that's what makes theta healing very painless, quick, permanent, and it's as if it's always been. So people will change without even really having to think about changing. But everybody else around them will notice, and it's a beautiful thing that gets to happen for them.
So
Did I
for our
do it? Did
listeners
I
out
do a
there
good enough job? I was just gonna say.
So, for our listeners out there, just for some clarity, brainwave isn't an actual object or a thing. What she's describing is that your brain, the brain waves, can be measured in cycles per second. And so when you're when a higher frequency brain waves is more when you're alert and you're doing other things. And there are practitioners that teach you how to reduce your cycles per second, thereby reducing the frequency that your brain is firing. Because when we are very stressed, we're in fight or flight, it's like a high beta, there's a high frequency. We don't learn very well there and we don't heal very well there either. So, what she's describing is a slower cycles per second. And in that state, people tend to be more malleable, if you will. More ability is there for people to create change that's a little bit longer lasting. Brenda, when we say trauma informed, what does that actually mean in practice?
So, and are you talking about like from a theta healing practice? What does that mean? Like being trauma informed or being or addressing trauma?
So, at the very beginning of each episode on neuroalchemy, we like to set the groundwork to have some common vocabulary between what we know and what our listeners may not yet know. So, in a very general sense, you have indicated to me in a previous communication that what you do is trauma informed. So, when you say that what the work that you do is trauma informed, can you tell our listeners what that actually means in practice?
So, in my practice, from a theta healing perspective, we believe that trauma is held on a cellular level. And we also say that as a human being, in the world, that you travel around and when you experience trauma, and trauma is relative. Okay, let's get that straight right now because everybody thinks that trauma has to be like an act of war or a car accident. But I always say that trauma can be something as simple as your mom was 5 minutes late picking you up from preschool. It can be just about anything that keeps your brain in a loop thinking about it. That's typically when we know that it's a trauma, is that it keep thinking about the event or the people involved or what we could have done differently about it. So when you experience trauma from a theta healing perspective, you create what we call free floating memories. You always say we just pack a bag and we carry them around with us. And then what happens is that either it'll do one of two things. It'll either cause you to project the reaction that you had from your trauma to something that doesn't even look, sound, or smell like it. Just something triggered you and you had that response. Or you attract more of the same type of trauma so that you re experience it. If you ever talk to a chiropractor, they'll tell you that anybody that's come to them that's had a car accident, will typically have another fender bender because they're carrying that energy of that trauma of the car accident with them. So with Theta Healing, what we do, again, bypassing the conscious and subconscious mind, because those are not going to change your trauma. But when you carry your trauma at a cellular level, when you can remove the free floating memories, do the forgiveness around it from through Theta Healing, that actually neutralizes the trauma.
And third, what makes an approach integrative rather than singular or linear?
One, it's cellular, so it's integrative. And it also encapsulates because when we experience a trauma, then what ends up happening is that it's just like a spider web and it touches so many different things, like a net, not a spider web, a net, and it touches so many different things. So that when you do the one on a cellular level, even if we just addressed one trauma, which God bless the person that's only had one trauma in their life. But when you do that, it actually works just like a net and it captures a whole lot more because sometimes some of our other traumas have been a result of other traumas that we've had prior to that. And what's really cool about Theta Healing is that we don't have to know what caused the trauma. Sometimes people have responses. Some people will know, say they have fear of heights or they have a fear to cross a bridge. They can't tell you why, they just do. Well, that means that there's been a trauma and they don't have to remember or, you know, relive the trauma in order to heal it. It's just that we have to know, like, okay, this is what's happening as a result of it. We'll go to that original event that caused the trauma, which could have been something that you inherited, could have been something you brought into this life with, and it could be something that you blocked out that you experienced in this life if you can't recall why. These are all different ways that as human beings we do so that we can function in life. So for what I do, it is integrative because it covers so much and it covers it on a mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical level, as well as if you've inherited it, if you've brought it in, if you've experienced it in this lifetime, or if you're just carrying it around in your soul. And when I say that, just carrying it around, I mean you're carrying it around in your soul. I don't mean to make light of it. So we can do that without us having to know so much. We get to know how it's appearing in your life.
I'd like to gently step into your personal journey. You've named a 34-year healing process, and we don't need to go into details of early trauma, but what feels most important is what helped you begin to reclaim safety and self trust. Brenda, what were some of the turning points that helped you move from surviving to actually healing?
Well, I think it was finding safe places to express emotion. Like I ended up in my 30s and 40s, going to places that were retreats that you could, take a bat and be, a beanbag. And a lot of things that I did when I was younger were just a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of energy. But it did help improve things for me. And one of the things that I also discovered, and I feel like it is because when you can express emotion or you can, heal something. I did a lot of more emotional healing, and I also experienced some modalities that allowed me to have temporary relief and then usually a boomerang or a re-experience of the trauma, which didn't work for me. So I just kept searching. And it wasn't until I found Theta Healing that I did find that things shifted for me, that it allowed me to, I feel like that as human beings, we live with a lot of regret, which have typically been reactions. I say every poor decision that I ever made in my life was based on a reaction. And so being able to be neutral, to be able to be objective, to be non reactionary, that really happened once I discovered Theta Healing because I was shifting things without having to know why, which was perfect for me.
Over time, your own healing led you into helping others. You've spent more than 20 years working with Theta Healing and trained across many complementary modalities. From your perspective, what patterns do you consistently see in people that are recovering from trauma?
Well, I see people being their own worst enemies. really they see those repeating patterns. I say that we eventually reach an age where we realize that the common denominator and what's not been working has been us. And it's, that self sabotage for happiness, for success, for even being balanced, that merciless non forgiveness that people have for themselves and making them the reason that everything's gone wrong. And I believe in accountability. I believe in, taking responsibility, but there are times when I think that we overdo it and we compensate for it by it being all our fault. I see where people, create physical illness within themselves because of all of the trauma that they've experienced and not having a way to be able to find a way that will help relief from it for people. But a lot of it is self-sabotage, self-blame, a lot of resentment for ourselves. And then people go to the other end where they don't take any responsibility at all, and they're the perpetual victim, and then it's usually one extreme for the other. It's like most people, nobody lies in the gray until they've healed some, right? And it can be in that neutrality.
Healing without reopening wounds feels like the heart of your message. There's a belief that healing requires reliving, retelling, or reopening pain. And for many people, that belief alone feels so overwhelming. Can you talk about how healing can happen through somatic safety, gentle work with the subconscious, and nervous system support without re traumatization?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I'll say this. I did a lot of the reopening of the wounds, because that's all that was available and around when I was younger. And, for probably a good 15 years, did a lot of that. And it was exhausting. It was expensive. It was exhausting. And it was hard to maintain the results that I got from it because it just felt like it was never ending. And I know, I always tell this story that I would invite my sister to everything I would do. I would invite my sister. I have one sibling. I would invite her to come with me. I would offer to pay, and she would say, "No, thank you. Been there, done that. No, thank you." She was on her own healing journey. "No, thank you." And when I learned Theta Healing, about 6 weeks later, there was another class available. And I did my usual obligatory invitation for her and to learn it, to experience it, to heal with it. And she said yes. And I didn't ask any questions. I just immediately enrolled her. And we were going on a lunch break on that first day of class because I was TAing it and she was attending it. And one of the other students asked her, "Why did you attend this class?" And she said, "The difference that I see in my sister." And I just was sitting across from her and I went, "Hold up. Are you saying that you've seen more difference in me in the last 6 weeks than you have like in the last 15 years?" And she went, "Yeah, that's what I'm saying." And so for me, I thought, this is an answer for me. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be arduous. It doesn't have to be, re experiencing. It can actually happen, as I tell people, yes, I feel it probably feels like I'm, pounding a Bible about theta healing and preaching about it. That's the road that I discovered for myself. And there are many roads to get to where we want to get. I think what probably Dr. Sarah and I are both saying is that you can find one that actually fits for you and makes a difference without it having to, tear your life down or make you or drain you of energy or make you have to re-experience it because that's traumatic in itself to re-experience something like that. And I have found because I've experienced, again, 13 different certifications, and I'm always open to having new experiences. I mean, it could even be a homeopathic remedy. There are great ones for grief. There are great ones, for physical pain. It doesn't have to be necessarily going to an individual. It can be just whatever finds, but it's just to know that it's possible.
Let's talk about what integrative trauma informed care actually feels like. Not in theory, but in lived experience. How do different modalities often work together? And what might that look like for someone that's listening at home? And I really think you kind of already started talking a little bit about this when you pointed out that there's so many ways to heal, right? And this is the one that has worked for you. And there's so many other things it sounds like you also include. It's not just one thing on its own, but there's different components that have worked for you specifically. And those might not be the same that work for others. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think that there are some great methods out there just for emotion, right? So there's emotional freedom technique, which is called tapping. And that one's really good, right? It can really change things. It's an easy process. You can look it up on a YouTube video. You can also go to a practitioner. There are courses on it. Like as far as when I say courses, yes, like to learn it, but also courses that address like just certain topics, whatever that is for you. There's a lot out there around that. There's a method that I've become aware of. I don't think it's a new method, but it's a new method for me. It's called the Serenity Method. Amazing, meeting with a Serenity Method practitioner. You tell them what your emotions are, and it works. I also have a AI technology. I've had it for years before we started hearing about ChatGPT and AI and everything else. That is just a matter of just typing in what a person's going through. I just because anything that will help you energetically or vibrationally, I'm not sure, whatever word resonates for you. When we're in pain, when we are feeling, what we would call negative in any way, we are at a lower vibration. So even things like Sophie, I always kind of butcher this a little bit, but Soflegio. It's Sofflegio tones. There's a ton of them. There's tuning forks. There's so many different ways that if we just raise our vibration, we feel better. There are certain techniques like body code, emotion code, theta healing that allow us to remove what prevents us from staying in that vibration. Trying to think what else is out there. So I like EFT and Serenity Method for emotion. And even people who don't know any techniques but call themselves healers and have you've vetted them, right? Like either a friend has worked with them or you know that they have integrity, that they're good. I had a guy that I worked with in the last year. Apparently my alignment was off and one leg was longer than the other, which is common for people, which was kind of throwing me off. And, we did a phone session and all of a sudden my legs were the same, were the same length. And, how did that affect me? I'm not sure how it affected me, but I could definitely tell that I was walking differently and I was using different muscles. So I mean, and I'm trying to think what else is there. And even if you do like Reiki or polarity therapy, those all just like clear the energy out. So it's just, I love a lot of these methods, but I always love to do them with theta healing, right? I always say that theta healing is a very collaborative and respectful modality that it works beautifully. Like I have, in my career have had, counselors and LPCs that will either learn the technique or they'll send their clients to me before they start working with them so that it just can be easier. I do the same thing with a lot of coaches who have, like, say, programs to help people for themselves personally or professionally that I always say that I just make it easier for people to work with people and to be able to get the results that they wanna get with whatever ever else they're doing. So, there are so many modalities, and I always just say, I support people in experiencing any of them once they've vetted a person, once they know about the person, understand their background, maybe have met them on Dr. Sarah's podcast, and have learned and they've felt good to you. then that's, and then you can say, well, this will help me with this, or how would I put this together? And most people, to sure that has good credentials and is of integrity will be able to tell you, well, I would do this first and then I would do this. And I always tell people, I give people an opportunity to just have a conversation with me for 30 minutes to ask any questions that they want with no obligation whatsoever, because I feel that, you know, an informed decision, which Dr. Sarah is really good at giving y'all information so that you can understand things, is power. It empowers you. It's gathering information and then also going into, what feels right for me.
I love that. I always say knowledge is power. It's very, very true. The more we know, the more we can do something about whatever it is that's ailing us, whether that's a thought process or an emotion thing or a physical, right? So, knowledge is definitely empowering. There's a deeply rooted belief that healing must take years or decades. From your experience, how does nervous system safety sometimes allow healing to happen more quickly than people expect? And what would you want listeners to know about pacing, hope, and compassion?
Well, I might have to have you repeat the second half because that's like a two-parter. Just to go back what we were saying before, it could even be reading a book or doing a different practice. Like I love, gosh. Well, one, I thought that The Secret, which came out years ago, was really beautiful in making people aware. And then Rhonda Byrne also has a book called, I think, Magic or something like that, that just talks about 28 days of gratitude. Sometimes it was just that it's not so much that we have to do a lot, it's just that we have to allow our brains, right? Because we train our brains how to think. And if we constantly stay in the negativity or in the problem instead of the solution, and again, there's a balance to that because we don't want to discount what's going on, but we want to be able to be in a more solution. So I think I'm going to have you ask that question again, Dr. Sarah, on what we moved toward, because I felt like, oh, I need to talk about that too. Because it could even be a book, an audio, or, a video.
No problem at all. So, it was just from your experience, how does nervous system safety sometimes allow healing to happen more quickly than people would expect?
Got it. That's the first half. Any type of healing that we get is going to help your nerve, or most of it. I'm not going to say all of it, but most of it is going to help your nervous system. Your nervous system always being in that fight or flight, or always feeling, which again lends to us always feeling like we have to protect ourselves, or, it's unsafe out there kind of thing. That's always constantly keeping, you know, that causes your muscles to tighten. It takes up space in your brain, which affects your creativity and your problem solving. It makes you, feel like that you're constantly stressed. So when we can even out the nervous system, when we can allow it to not have to be at attention. So just that in itself opens up the room for things to change. It opens up for us to come up with our own solutions or be in our knowing and feel, directed by it. So when our nervous system can be like that, so much more is possible because when it's heightened and we keep it there, they're fighting each other, right? Like for us to heal. And so when it's more even, it does accelerate it and allow it to be quicker so that it's surprising sometimes for people, I think, just in that itself.
And the second part was, what would you want listeners to know about pacing, hope, and compassion?
Pacing. When you work with a modality like data healing, things happen very quickly. So it doesn't, and a lot of stuff is worked on so that it goes at the pace that is more of an inner driven, more of it from a knowing base. When you do something like traditional psychotherapy, you have to know, and you're usually a good therapist will go at a slower pace to make sure that you're, don't need to be checked in somewhere for the weekend or whatever, right? Like that you're not going too fast. And I think that even when you have something that feels like it's working and it's going very quickly, you have to decide what you need to for yourself, for your nervous system, for just to feel safe. There's nothing wrong with saying, I need for this to go at a slower pace. And then there's also, on the other hand, it's like, well, if it's not causing me any mental, physical, or spiritual harm, maybe I need to experience what it feels like to move a little quicker and still be safe. So, that's what I would say about safety. With compassion, I feel like when we look at compassion, it's about having compassion for ourselves. I think we always end up not on the list or the last on the list. And when we can have that empathy and compassion for ourselves, that really accelerates things too. Because again, that constant regret, that constant judgment of self really lowers the vibration and slows things down. And then what was the third one, Dr. Sarah?
The third one was hope.
Well, I feel that when people can have that little crack that allows us to feel that something is different, that something has changed, even just a teeny weeny bit, hope is pretty amazing. Quite frankly, a lot of people feel hopeless and may not even be aware of it. That's another thing that I find with clients is that there's a constant state of hopelessness that lends for us to be very jaded or, again, to project some of the trauma onto things to misjudge it. So, hope is, I guess, it flows ever eternal. I guess if we had it, ideally, if we could have that happen, and it is important.
I like to give our listeners a challenge of the week, and I like for my guests to offer that up, Brenda. So, my question for you is if you could give our listeners one simple practice that you would like them to try every day over the next 7 days, what would your challenge be for us this week?
First off, first thing that I'm going to say that helps with the subconscious is that I'm going to tell you to attempt it. No try, right? It's that old like Yoda thing. It's either do or don't. There is no try. So I want you to attempt to do this. And I like to give things that are really simple and easy, hopefully. I just want you to be aware of what you're saying and thinking. It's in those times when we're by ourselves that, we really talk. It's like I always kiddingly say, like, I have a godson and he can be a little negative. He doesn't get it from his parents. His parents, he just came in this world like that. He's just negative, right? And my sister will say to him, like, hey, don't talk about my best friend like that because they're very, very close. And he'll be like, who? And he'll be like, like he's his worst enemy. He's like 13 now, but this would be conversations that we had when he was, like 6 and 7. And so my challenge to you is, which I hope will be easy, is to be aware of when you are thinking or saying something negative. Stop it, send it to the light, cancel it and send it to the light because you're putting that out there in the world. Cancel it, send it out to the light, and then either think or say it in a positive form for yourself. That's my challenge.
I love that. In my experience, I really feel like the universe is, I often tell people, be mindful of what you think, right? Be mindful of what you speak because it reminds me of like a drive through window, right? When you go through and you get to that big menu with the speaker on it and you order up whatever it is that you're ordering, it's a little bit of time. You got to wait in line and eventually you're going to get what you came for. I like to talk about consciousness very much the same way. If I walk around and I say, I'm sick, I'm tired, I'm sick, I'm tired, I'm going to get back what I have been asking for, what I've been putting out there. And even if I am sick, even if I am tired, I don't have to claim that as the only reality there is, right? I could say, I am healing. I am rejuvenating, right? And it's the same, but it's just flipping the script on exactly what we're putting out there because that is what I really want. If I'm sick and I'm tired, what I want is to be healing and to be in that process of rejuvenation. So I love that challenge. That's very near and dear to my heart. Brenda, as we begin to close, what do you hope listeners walk away with after hearing this conversation?
I think it's my big topic is that healing doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to take a long time. And to be able to give people hope that it can be different. That, well, she's had an experience and she's been doing this for 20 years and she's worked with a lot of different people who have been able to make change without great effort. And change doesn't take great effort. That's really what I want people to know.
Thank you. Brenda, thank you for sharing your wisdom, your lived experience, and your reminder that healing doesn't require re traumatization. For our listeners, if something softened or opened today, please move tenderly with it. Healing happens in layers. Take what resonates with you, let the rest settle, honor your own pace. And if something you heard today was helpful for a friend, a family member, or a colleague, please like, subscribe, share this episode. That's truly how we get these episodes out there to the people who need them the most. Until next time, this is Dr. Sarah, and this is NeuroAlchemy. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are becoming. Until next time, bye for now.